Well, welcome back to the Practical Church Podcast. My name is Dylan Dotson, and I'm your host. And this show is all about helping you plant and grow healthy churches that thrive. Today, we're going to talk about how to communicate upcoming changes effectively at your church. I'm going to give you 6 ways to do that and share some ways that we've done it recently at New City. And of course, as always, this show is brought to you in partnership with Mission Support. Mission Support knows you want to be effective in ministry, but if you're like most pastors, you probably feel like you never have enough time, energy, or expertise to get everything done. There's a lot of stuff that it takes to lead and to run a church, a lot of back-end administrative stuff that might be not your forte or your favorite things to do. So whether it's things like bookkeeping, SEO, payroll, websites, or any of their services, you can talk to a guy today at missionsupport.com and go from feeling scattered to focused on your mission. It's possible to love being a pastor again. So missionsupport.com. And of course, if you want more from the show, you can go to missionsupport.com/practical, sign up for the newsletter that goes out every other Wednesday, give you more practical tips and advice for churches, and even submit a question for us to answer at a future episode. So again, missionsupport.com/practical. And now let's get into today's episode. All right, 6 ways to communicate upcoming changes to your church. This is particularly maybe bigger changes, not just like, hey, this thing is starting next week, but like, if you got something going up that's somewhat significant that you want to share with your church, what are the ways you can go about doing it effectively and helpfully? Recently, as I'm recording this, we had a vision night at New City Church where I lead, and we talked about some collectively relatively bigger changes at our church, kind of 4 things that we're doing differently. One has to do with how we're running our Sunday services. Another one has to do with how often we're asking people to serve and what that's going to look like, because that's going to be changed from how we've been doing it in the past. Our assimilation process of how we're onboarding new people is going to be completely different. I might share that in a future episode as well as a new 2-year vision that we're laying out for our church. And so we got a couple of changes that we shared at Vision Night, and I want to maybe talk through like, hey, maybe not be 4 things, but like what's one thing? Maybe it's like, hey, if we're changing from 1 to 2 services, or we're changing how we run groups, or how we run serving, or we've got some new initiative that we're doing that we've never done before. How do we communicate things effectively so that people know what's going on and that they're also excited about it? I always just want to caveat too, before I give the 6 ways to communicate change. Remember, it's okay if people at first are confused or have questions. Remember, many times when you as a church leader, elders, staff, whatever, have come to a decision to maybe go a different direction with the church, you've been thinking about it for a while. And then when you share with your church, it's the first time they hear it. And so I think sometimes in ministry, we can misinterpret questions and trying to understand with like pushback and people not like being excited about what's going on. So just like whenever you communicate change, be gracious, be kind, understand this is the first time they're hearing about it. And if you, instead of being defensive, just kind of take some time to reiterate why, what's going on, the thought process. I have found that most people are quite receptive. They just have questions when they're hearing about it for the first time. And so just be cognizant of that. It's okay for people to ask questions. It doesn't necessarily mean they're against it. They're just trying to, take some time to process, which you might have already been doing for the last 6 or 9 months. So of course you're ready to go ahead. So here are the different ways you can share changes at your church. And then I'm going to share maybe the best plan of action to go about doing it. Okay. So here's the different ways. One is through like a church email. So if you have like a church email newsletter, I recommend that you should have one and that you should send it every single week. You can, if you're not sure what to say in it, maybe you can do a little blurb, little vision thing from the church, maybe your upcoming events, so a little devotional, something like that. But I would get in the process, the rhythm of regularly every week, letting people know what's going on and sending your church a church-wide email. And so, of course, sending a church-wide email is a way to share an announcement. Now, my recommendation here is that if you have a relatively big change coming up, the church email not be the first time they hear about it. Okay. Now it might be true because you've gone through other forms of communication and like people just didn't listen, they weren't there, whatever. Some people might eventually hear about things for the first time in an email, but hopefully that's not like the majority of your church. That you've gone around, you've gone through all the channels, you've done some of the other things we're going to talk about. That by the time it gets to the email, it's kind of like a reminder or a refresher, and not the first time. And so again, my recommendation is like, if you've got some big change coming up, don't let email be the first time. Nobody can really ask questions in email. It's easy to misunderstand an email. An email is typically maybe a little bit shorter than how you would have explained it in person or from stage or something like that. And so one of the ways that you can share an upcoming change is through an email. But my recommendation is that this would be a follow-up or a refresher. It would not be the first time they hear about it. So if you're going to go from 1 to 2 services for the first time, hopefully email is not the first time they hear about it, making a change to how you serve or maybe how you do missions or groups or anything like that. That for the majority of people, especially your leaders and those that are really involved, an email is not the first time. If that's the case, you probably will get legitimately get a lot of pushback because people are confused, they have questions, and an email just seems like, why didn't nobody tell me about this in any other area? And so, of course, one way to explain or share church updates and changes is through an email. But again, I would highly recommend not be the first point of contact when you share something new. Second way you can communicate a change in your church is by recording a video. Recording a video. Now, this is much better than email because you may talk through, people can see your expressions, you can explain things in a little bit more depth. Now, let me share with you the downside of a video. The majority of people will not watch it, especially if it's over like 3 or 4 minutes. The majority of people will not watch a video if it's long. Now, again, you might be thinking, well, it's not that long or whatever, but a lot of times if somebody's checking let's say you send the video in an email, like they're checking their email on their phone, are they really going to click it? People can get impatient, and so they just don't do anything with it. So again, I think videos are good recaps, which I'll explain maybe how to approach it in a bit. But again, I would not make that my first point of communication either. I would typically use a video for more of a recap of what has already been shared, because most people aren't going to watch the video. Or if they do, if you share something in 3 to 4 minutes that really took like 15 minutes to really digest, that can be hard as well. I think, when you send like a church-wide email as a follow-up or a refresher about an update, you can also include a video in there. But just know that most people probably aren't going to watch it. So make sure you write your email in a way with bullet points or whatever so they're going to read it, because most people won't watch a video. So I'm not saying videos are bad, but just know that a lot of people won't watch them. And so if that is going to be like the primary way you're communicating a change is through a video or social media video, don't be surprised if most people miss out or don't really watch it or don't know what's going on because they didn't click on the video. So you can record a video, but just know, maybe this doesn't sound popular, most people probably are going to watch it, especially if it's over a couple minutes long. But that's another way to communicate a change. The third way is to communicate a change or things that are coming up is through some sort of church meeting. So a vision night, a members meeting, if you do something like that, something where you get people together. In an ideal world, this is the best place to share an upcoming change or vision or something that's going differently at your church. Of course, you can share like on a Sunday morning as well, but typically, the announcement slot is not long enough. Or if you share like the beginning of the sermon, like people are going to be more focused on that. I guess if there's a way to maybe preach the upcoming change, so like if it really goes with the sermon and you can spend 10 minutes of the sermon talking about it and it goes with the sermon, like that's a way to do it on a Sunday morning. Like if it feels like an extra thing, it would not be great. But if it can be something that you include in the sermon and it goes really well, it fits really well, that's the way to do it. Or you could do something like a vision night or members meeting or something where you get people together. Again, I think this is the ideal place because you're going to get the most amount of people together. They can see you, they can hear you in person. So it's not left up to interpretation when they're reading the text of an email. And you can spend more than 5 minutes explaining what is going on. Again, it's kind of like watching a live stream of a church service. People will watch music and stuff on a live stream. Like they'll watch the whole live stream if they turn on your live stream when the service starts. But the chance of them watching an entire live stream when it's not actually live is extremely small. That's why I've shared other episodes, like on your church website, I would only put your sermon because people ain't watching the worship. But they are watching it during the live stream. It's the same thing kind of like this, like when it comes to videos, like giving a video update versus like an in-person at a members meeting or whatever. People are much less likely to watch the video rather than if they were there in person. So some sort of church meeting, I think, is the best. Like gathering is the best. Now, here's the thing. You might say, well, like not everybody's going to come. If I do a Sunday night thing where we want to share some vision, or like we did vision night. Not everybody in my church is going to come to that. So just like recording a video, like why don't I just do a video if not everyone's going to watch it? The difference is that it communicates, hey, something is happening and we want you to know about it. Not everyone might come, and so then you can follow up with like an email and a video and all that sort of thing. But you've communicated, hey, something's happening and we are providing a space for us to share and discuss it. And even if people can't come to the environment that you're creating, that extra environment where you're going to share and discuss it, they know that you've gone out of your way to try to create a space people can ask questions. And then when you send that email, video, whatever, they're not shocked by it because they know some changes are coming. So even though not everyone's going to come to the members meeting or the vision night or whatever, the fact that you communicate, hey, we've got something we want to share with you, says, okay, they've thought about this, they're creating space for people to ask questions. Even if I can't be there, just like the feeling of like, okay, this is something that's important. I'm not going to be upset like I randomly get an email because I know change is coming, can be really beneficial. And so the third thing is some sort of church meeting, in-person meeting is really, really helpful. And I think ideal, especially if the change is pretty big. Number 4, through one-on-one conversations. This is something that I do a lot of. Like, for example, we had our vision night recently, and when I was having one-on-one conversations with people, like meetings about other stuff, but like we're just together, I would proactively share some of the stuff that we were going to share at vision night. Whether or not they were going to be at vision night or not, it does a couple things. One, it makes them feel like really connected and like really in the know. People like to know what's coming up. And 2, it allows you to get feedback and for people to ask questions. And so what happens was with some of the people that I had one-on-one meetings with or whatever, and I shared some of the changes. Well, they also came to vision night. And so they're not hearing it for the first time. So you already have some people who have thought about and processed these changes and can be like cheerleaders for you and can be excited for you. It can help other people, get on board as well because it's not their first time hearing about it. And so regardless if it's like, again, I'll use the vision night example, before the vision night or after the vision night, I think one of the most effective ways to do this is through one-on-one conversations. Now, of course, depending on the change that you have to share, like it might not be something where you want to like tell a bunch of people ahead of time. And so this one-on-one won't be helpful. But after the fact, when the announcement, after the announcement then comes up, when you're having your regular scheduled meetings with people or you're getting together with coffee, lunch, whatever it might be, in your small group, like it's okay to go out of your way to maybe ask questions and go out and talk about these things so they feel like they're heard, they can hear more of the why behind it, which gets them more excited, especially when they're in conversations with other people and other people have questions. They then might be able to explain some of what you shared with them. So one-on-one conversations is I'm a really big fan of those, of like of throwing like church vision or changes in those things so that you can get feedback and you can already start to get people excited about what you have coming up. So don't neglect, the meetings that you have with people, also talking about church stuff as well. Number 5 is through small groups. So one of the things we do at New City is, we write our community group leader guides, our community groups are sermon based, and we always do at most. We won't do anything more than this. And we have a recent episode on small groups, and so you can go back and watch that, like how to do leader guides and how we run them. But one of the things we do is we include announcements. So 3 at the most, like really quick announcements for people to have coming up. That's another place. Again, this is not a great place for a first time, like to hear about some changes, like when they go to small group and somebody reads an announcement. The other downside of this is like people can't really ask questions. I mean, they can ask questions for your leader, but if they don't have the answers, then that could be difficult. But it is a way to follow up. Like, hey, remember we had this change, or this thing is coming up, or we're going to 2 services, or like groups are taking a break, or this initiative, or whatever. Don't neglect small groups as a way for people to also, because not everyone checks email or social media. People aren't always paying attention during the announcements at your church service. And so it's just another way to like communicate with people. And so don't neglect, again, what we do is at the most, we'll do 3, typically 1 or 2 church announcements that are on our leader guide. And like, it's like 2 sentences at most. Because if you have like this long drawn out thing, people are going to stop listening. And so it's like, hey, we've got this event, for example, here's 2 sentences about it. There you go. Here's this other thing you have coming up, 2 sentences about it. There you go. So don't neglect small groups. Is it also a great place to share changes? Again, it's not a good place for them to hear about it for the first time, but to reemphasize what's going on in your small groups when you send out announcements. I also, as a side note, like depending on how you might do it, you might maybe email your group leaders weekly. And maybe you send a guide and you might say in the email, hey, make sure you remind your group members about X. But if that's not in the guide, if you send them an actual guide, then it's easy for them to forget. So I recommend if you want your group leaders to say anything and you create some sort of group leader guide every week, then put it in the guide so that people can be sure to remember to say that announcement. And then last but not least, you could do an online meeting. So something like Zoom or the equivalent, you can host an online meeting. The positives of doing an online meeting is that it's super easy to attend. There's a lot less friction than having to, go and drive somewhere, potentially have to get childcare. The downside is it's very easy to be distracted. People are maybe more likely to show up a little bit late or leave early or have other things going on, maybe checking social media as you're talking. And so they're not going to be quite as engaged. The positive, however, of a online meeting is that you can send the replay after. So for example, what we do at New City is we do a quarterly all-church Zoom meeting where once a quarter on a Sunday at 5 o'clock, I take about 25 minutes, and just share updates of things that are going on at New City, things that we're praying through, things that we're thinking through. And then people can submit questions as well. And so again, not everybody comes to that. A lot of people don't. And a lot of people watch it after the fact. And a lot of people don't sign up or watch or do anything. But again, I think one of the positives about this is that, again, it's another, whether or not they come to our all-church Zoom meeting or not, it's another proactive step of, hey, we're trying to be open and transparent of all that's going on in New City. Here's another place to come and ask questions. Again, you can send a replay after. Again, the downside is, like, for example, we do our quarterly church Zoom meetings, is like they're about 20 to 25 minutes. And so a lot of people will, if they're on it live, they'll watch the whole thing, but they may not watch it later. Of course, you can also, double speed or 1.5 speed a video, which is helpful. But we do Zoom, and then after the Zoom meeting, of course, we send out, everyone that registered, we send out the Zoom link recording. And then also at our weekly church email, we also put it in there as well for them to watch. So an online Zoom meeting or an online meeting is also a great place to share announcements. Now, let me share maybe the way we've done it recently to encourage you. Hey, if I got something big to share, what's the best roadmap maybe to do this with the least amount of frustration and to get people the most excited? So what we did was we had a vision night and we shared for a couple weeks coming up, hey, we're going to make some changes. By the way, I would tell you people, like, if you're there confused, like nothing bad is happening, like nothing you need to be aware of, like scared about or anything like that. So like no one's like, oh, what's going on? But we had a vision night. Now, we had a vision night about some of the changes, which I mentioned in the beginning. I also, because none of them were secretive, I also shared these in conjunction with meetings I was having with people throughout the week, like just typical pastoral meetings, whatever. I would also share these before and, of course, after as well, because it wasn't a secret. And so, like, we were trying to have a vision night so as many people as possible could hear it at one time, and also that people would have the opportunity to know, hey, we got some changes coming up. Even if you can't come to the vision night, like, expect to hear from us what they are. And so I would having one-on-one meetings beforehand and in the vision night, the most amount of people there at one time. Of course, if you don't have like a vision night or whatever very frequently, you'll probably get more people to show up, which is helpful. We've also, just as a side note, have discovered probably the past year or so that Thursday nights seem to be really good nights for events. So we've done like a parenting event. We did a vision night. We're doing more things on Thursday nights because on the weekends, people, have plans. So they might already have plans on Friday or Saturday night. And psychologically, Thursday is right before Friday. So it almost feels like a weekend. And so they're still in town if, they have weekend plans. And it also doesn't feel like a Monday or Tuesday where they have the whole week ahead of them. They're already in a little bit of a better mood. And so we did our vision night Thursday at 6. We also catered dinner. But as a side note, we've just found Thursday nights to be a great time because people are they have less plans as they do on the weekend. And it feels like it's almost the weekend. So just as a side note, try Thursday nights for not just this, but for church events. We found it to be helpful. But we had a vision night and one-on-one meetings. After the vision night, we send as brief as I could. It was definitely a longer than average email, but it was as brief as I could, with a shortened video attached. So what I did was we had 4 changes. I did bullet points and just a couple sentences. Point 1, it was in bold, a couple sentences. Here's a second change in bold, a couple sentences. Did 4 things. And then I said at the bottom of this video is a shortened, condensed video of what we shared at our vision night. And so I shared at our vision night, I shared for about 25 minutes, and then we had another staff member share for about 25 minutes. What I did is the next day I recorded a video of just my talk, because my talk was more about what the changes are and why we're doing them. The second one was about how to implement them, which wasn't as important for letting people know what the changes were. So what they were and why. And I did an 11-minute version just on my iPhone, set up on my desk in my house, just stared at it, talked through my stuff. Now, it's still 11 minutes, but it's shorter than 25 minutes. And so already you're more likely to get people to watch it if it's already shorter. And also in the email, they saw what the changes were. So here's what they are for, maybe here's the 4 things. If you want some context, here's another brief video that explains a little bit more in detail. Now again, Not everyone might have read the whole email. Most people probably didn't actually watch the video after the fact, but the fact that we gave it to them showed, hey, we're trying to like be as communicative as possible. And those that are interested will watch it. And then, of course, I've continued with one-on-one reminders and answered questions, as well as announced at small groups. So some of the changes, like they'll be in our group leader guide. Hey, we're doing this on this weekend. We're starting what's called the Weekender, which is our assimilation process this weekend. And they're not necessarily new information. And then, yeah, reiterate via consistent church meeting if you have one. So like if we do like our quarterly Zoom meeting, we'll talk through some of these changes. If you do a members meeting or whatever, if you get together with your key leader at your church, whatever, to kind of go through them. So again, I just like to recap. Here's how we did it. We had a vision night, a gathering where we tried to get as many people as possible to share where they were in conjunction with one-on-one meetings I was having. And the day after, because it was still fresh, I wrote a brief email summary, as well as I recorded a briefer video than the thing on Thursday night, because they're more likely to watch it if it was shorter. And then continued one-on-one conversations, and as well as put it in our small group announcements. And so if you do that, again, people can ask questions, call, email, text at any point. But I feel like that's a really strong way to announce changes, where the most amount of people can hear about it. They can ask their questions. They can see, they can hear like why you've thought through. I think a lot of times, a lot of pushback we get is because you might have thought through clearly, or your leadership team or whomever might have clearly thought through, here's why I'm making these changes, but then you don't explain why you're making the changes. And so it comes across as you haven't really thought through it. And so again, a vision night or something like that is helpful because you can explain, here's how things were going, here's what we would like to see, and so therefore here's the changes that we are making. So again, those are 6 ways to communicate upcoming changes to your church: a church email, you can record a video, some sort of church meeting, one-on-one conversations through small groups, or an online meeting. And like I shared, I think there's a hierarchy depending on how big your change is that you might want to go. But those are some ways that you can share upcoming changes to your church. Here is my ministry observation for this episode. Here's the thing. People, for the most part, don't mind being asked to do more if the reasoning and the why is clear. People don't mind being asked to do more if the reasoning or the why is clear. I think many times at church, we might need people to volunteer, or we might need help in a particular area, but we feel bad asking because maybe the people are already serving and they're already doing this, and we don't want to add another thing to their plate. First of all, most people that are like involved in your church, they love their church, they want it to do well, their friends are there. And so they aren't like a neutral party. Like they want things to do well. And if you can explain clearly, here's what we need and also why, people are more likely to respond. Again, I'll go back to the Vision Night example. We are basically asking our people to serve more frequently. And at our 2 services, which we're going back to in August, we went back to 1 service for the fall, or for the summer. We're going to be what serving looks like at 2 services is going to be different than what it has looked like in the past, and it's actually going to be a bigger ask. And so, a little bit nervous. We're asking people to serve more, and it's going to take them more time. But the consistent feedback I got from Vision Night was, "Hey, that's really great. We're excited about where we're going. Like this all makes sense. It's going to be awesome." Now, I'm not saying like absolutely everybody loved it, but at least the feedback I got was pretty much in that vein. And it's funny, right? Because we were asking people to do more, which will make me a little nervous, but for them to hear why we're asking it and what it's going to look like and what we hope that it accomplishes got them excited. Again, if we had just maybe gone back to 2 services, which we're doing at the end of August, and changed up how we're serving and not explained the why, I think we would have gotten a lot more like, well, we used to do it this way. Why are we doing this way? Like this is more than I signed up for in the beginning. Because they heard it in a compelling way, they were excited about it. And so I just want to be clear, or just remind you, people don't say no for people, whether it's about giving or serving or whatever. Don't say no for them, so be sure to ask. But if you can give a clear and compelling reason why you're doing what you're doing, the chances of them saying yes to it are significantly increased, and you might be surprised there might not be any pushback at all. In fact, you might see people actually self-volunteering to do even more because they're excited about what is going on or what the change is going to be. So again, just remember, people don't mind being asked to do more if the reasoning is clear. So here is my personal growth tip for this episode. And it really has to do a lot, particularly in our case, in pastoral and church ministry. Here's the idea. Don't move on, move forward. Don't move on, move forward. See, when you're dealing with a difficult loss, particularly the loss of a loved one, maybe a dream that has died, or anything that you need to or want to grieve, Trying to get over it is often an unrealistic and unhelpful saying and thing. It's like, it's not helpful. It's not even realistic. For example, I remember that when my dad died when I was 19 years old, and you hear a lot of like people say move on, or maybe in movies, it's like, it's time to move on. It's time to move on. It's time to, like, you don't, I remember thinking like, man, I don't move on from the loss of my dad. Like, that's not something that I forget about, or I just move past as if it doesn't even matter. You don't move on. I didn't move on from the lessons he taught me, the influence he had on in my life. I don't move on from him. I move forward with the lessons, with the memories, with the impact he had in my life. I can't move on, but I can move forward, carrying the impact again and the grief that he had on my life as my life continues. And so my encouragement maybe to you, or maybe even your meetings, your pastoral counseling meetings, or your meetings with other people, is that whatever it is that you might be grieving the loss of, you don't have to move on from it. It will always be a part of you. The lessons that you learn will always be a part of you. The wish that things might have gone different will always like be in the back of your mind. But rather, you can move forward and allow yourself to be shaped by your past experiences. You don't move on, but you can move forward. Today's question comes from Jonas in our Practical Church Facebook group, which if you're on Facebook, just join the Practical Church Facebook group. Thousands of people in there, get your questions answered and all that good stuff. Jonas asked this recently. Said, I need to finalize a church website domain pretty quickly. I have purchased .com, .org, and .church options. So examples of this site would be churchnamechurch.com, churchnamechurch.org, or churchname.church. He says, I'm no marketing website savant, so calling on the Practical Church community to offer some wisdom. Here is my wisdom for all of us. If you're looking for a website, do whatever it's possible to get a .com URL. Do whatever is possible to get a .com URL. That is the default, and increasingly more the default option. I mean, back when the web was a little bit younger, .org, .net, .com, like all these were used. .org is a second, I think is a distant second, because that's still a very legitimate URL, and a lot of universities, nonprofits use org. But .com is like everybody's default. I mean, nobody uses .net anymore or anything like that. It just sounds old and outdated. And what'll happen is like if your website is church name church dot, so like ours is New City RDU. Let's say it's New City RDU. Most people are going to assume it's .com. So they might type, if it's newcityrdu.net, or even if it was newcityrdu.org, the default, if people can't exactly remember the whole URL, is they're going to assume it's .com. Okay. Also, the problem with non-3-letter URL endings is that they're not always recognized. So for example, .church is not always recognized as an email attachment, or maybe as a social media, like check out newcityrdu.church. Sometimes they're not clickable, or they're not linkable, or they could be viewed as spam from people's computers. For example, I use something called the Arc browser. I used to use Chrome, now I use the Arc browser. And it will very often, like if I'm going to a URL that it thinks is weird, it'll give me like a disclaimer, and then I have to proceed to the site. Now, it's always like legitimate sites is actually kind of annoying, but I could see some people, particularly maybe those that are a little bit older, those a little bit nervous, not going because it says proceed to site or back to safety. I want to go back to safety. And so I would do everything possible to get a .com address, because that is like what everyone assumes it's going to be. It's a lot more normal. And if you don't use like a 3-letter .org, .net, .com, but use like .church or some of the other more creative ones that are more recent, a lot of these places won't link, and they might even put it as spam. And so I would do everything as possible to get a .com. And then if I could maybe give you a second pro tip to that, you also want to do everything possible to get all your social media channels to be the same. So for us, newcityrdu.com, New City RDU on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram, Twitter, which we don't use as much anymore, TikTok, it's all the same handle, which is the same as our URL. And if all those are different, people are not going to remember. So I would let social media like be an impact on the URL you get. Do everything you can to get a .com, and then whatever it is .com is, make that the same as your social media handles, so that all can be consistent, which is even more important the more digital of a society we become. But to answer Jonas's question, whatever you can to get a .com, even if it's not as great as the .org or the .church, like the URL is not as great as like maybe, newcitychurch.com, let's say it wasn't available, but newcitychurch.church was, I wouldn't do that. I would do whatever I could to get a .com. It's more searchable. If the links don't come up as weird or unclickable or a spam, and it's what the default option that everybody assumes is .com. So I'll do everything I could to get a .com website address. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining the Practical Church podcast today. Again, if you've got questions you want us to answer, or maybe a topic to hit at a future episode, you can go to missionsupport.com/practical to submit your question there. You can also on Facebook, go to the Practical Church Facebook group, interact. And again, if you want help running a lot of the back end stuff, the stuff that drags you down, check out Mission Support and talk to a guy today. Missionsupport.com. It's possible it is possible to love being a pastor again. So again, bookkeeping, payroll, websites, a lot of this back end stuff that you might not be trained for and that might just stress you out. Save time and energy by getting some outside help. Missionsupport.com. They're a great resource for us as well, and I highly recommend them to you. Next week, don't forget the Practical Church newsletter comes out the following week of the podcast. So missionsupport.com/practical to sign up for the newsletter, and I'll be back with you in 2 weeks for the next episode of the Practical Church podcast.